fellow travelers, and welcome to Versus Stars podcast. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. And remember, click the subscribe button, everybody. This is a very special episode because David Zappone boards the mothership. You know him from What We Left Behind, looking back at Star Trek Deep Space Nine, and for the Love of Spock. He's now the director and the executive producer of To the Journey, looking back at Star Trek Voyager. Now come on board to go traversing the stars. Hello, Mr. Zappone. Thank you so much for coming to Versus Stars podcast.
Hey, Jeff. Thanks for having me.
It's a total pleasure to have you. Actually, it's an honor. I'm a fan of all your documentaries, and I'm glad to have you on.
Great. Appreciate it.
So I always start off with a question of inspiration. So what inspired your love of film, and who are your earliest influences?
Well, that's an easy one. My earliest influence is right behind me, probably Mr. Shatner and Mr. Nimoy. I was a Star Trek fan from the jump. I think my dad and I started watching it when I was 7. So I picked it up in syndication and really just fell in love with it. And that inspired me to go to, in high school, actually before that, grammar school, get into theater. Then I got into stage directing and acting in high school, and then majored in film in college. So Star Trek kind of drove it, and it's pretty wild that I'm speaking to you now from Paramount Studios. My office here. I've been here for about 13 years.
That is absolutely amazing. So what is it about Star Trek that draws you to it? Is it just the stories? Is it a larger idealism of it?
Well, it was interesting when I was a kid, I'm talking like 8, 10 years old, I was drawn to Spock. And to the chagrin of my parents, because I wouldn't even show emotion. I wouldn't cry. I would, be stoic because I so admired Leonard's portrayal of Spock. And then as I got into high school, discovered girls, and all of a sudden it became more Kirk. Sure. That's what I always say. Once I got my driver's license, it became Kirk.
That's awesome.
I do think but to be serious, it's the idealism and it's the quality. Even as a child of that age, I could tell the quality of the production, the writing, the acting. Now, by the same token, I was also a huge fan of Lost in Space, but they're obviously, very different. But they both have their value. And I think Star Trek continued with that quality all through its up to the present day.
And obviously with Star Trek, there's a lot of messaging in there. As a younger person at 7, 8, 9, 10, was it clear the messages you're being told?
Well, certainly not to the extent, like, I don't think I would have picked up the anti-Vietnam or birth control messages that were going on. I discovered later. But I think what it did instill, certainly, I mean, I always say the original Star Trek, it's like a police show in space. They're the police for the galaxy, and good and bad, and fighting good and evil, and being moral. And I think certainly, I'll tell you what I love is that I can show it to my daughter, and she's 4, and she gets it, and it's quality. And there's certain episodes I probably wouldn't show her, but it really is a family. Certainly the original iteration, and I would even say the 80s and 90s were very family oriented.
And I'll say there is an ageless quality to a lot of the episodes. I mean, some of the episodes have aged less less well than others, but for the most part, even the original show, there's an ageless quality to it.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, I would say, I think it was maybe 6 months ago, I got my wife to sit down and watch all the original episodes, and she really liked it. So I mean, it's amazing that how wide of a range the audience is for a show like that. And even, like I said, 6 months ago, people are still discovering Star Trek for the first time, at least the original series.
I mean, filmmaking in the late 60s really had come very far. Television, certainly. And we were just walking on the lot here, and I was saying how when Paramount was Desilu back then, half of it. And you had Mannix, you had Mission Impossible, and Star Trek all at the same time. I mean, that's phenomenal.
And I mean, your background right now in connection to Star Trek is massive. You're basically one of the primary historians, it seems like now, of the Star Trek universe. You either produced or executive produced or directed What We Left Behind, which is looking back at Star Trek Deep Space Nine, For Love of Spock, The Captains, and others. So what keeps drawing you back to want to tell the Star Trek stories of these series?
Well, certainly it started with Shatner and the Captains, and that seemed to be a no-brainer. Bill, let's interview every actor that's played a starship captain, and he discovered all these interesting things along the way. And from there, we said, boy, these Star Trek conventions, what a phenomenon. Why don't we do a documentary and try to get to the bottom? And he actually did. He discovered things he had never thought of. He has genuine revelations. That's William Shatner's Get a Life. And then I convinced him to explore the first 3 years of TNG. And that became Chaos on the Bridge. So that was a pretty, and then we did 5 captains close-ups. It's a lot of Star Trek I did there in about 4 years. And then I said, well, I've kind of had it. I think it's time. And not even, I'd done enough. And then I got a call or an email from Leonard Nimoy, who said, would you be interested in working with my son, Adam, and producing a documentary on Spock, which became For the Love of Spock. So that kept me in it. Obviously, I'm not going to say no to Leonard Nimoy. And Leonard knew me through the Shatner works. And then in all those earlier films, I had gotten to know Ira Stephen Bear. And after we did the TNG doc, I said, Ira, Bill's kind of done with Star Trek. He's, we've explored enough. Would you essentially like to be Bill, the interviewer, in an exploration of Deep Space Nine? He said yes. And that became a 5-year journey. So just like one just kept leading to the other. And then probably the most interesting one is Voyager, what we're working on now, because we started that in March of 2020. We were on the Star Trek cruise. We got back on something like March 8th or 9th. And 3 days later, the whole world shut down, as you recall. So it was the only in-person anniversary event for the Voyager cast, and we got it. But then the world shut down. Paramount closed. I couldn't get to my office. And we decided, we lost a year because you couldn't film with COVID. And then we decided in 2021 to launch an Indiegogo campaign, the crowdfunding. And that could have gone either way because the world was still essentially shut down. You're in the middle of the pandemic. You don't know if people have the money. People are out of work. So we didn't know if it would be successful or not. And we ended up becoming the most successfully crowdfunded documentary in history. I believe somewhere around 1.5 million. Now, so that certainly kept me in Star Trek.
Now, if my research is correct, to the journey of the Voyager doc that we're going to be talking about, this is the first project you are solo credited as director. Is that accurate?
Yes, though that's still to be determined. We might adjust that, but because I shared credit with Ira on because primarily I think of myself as a producer, more as the person who's coming up with the ideas and putting everything together. I do a lot of the interviews when we don't have an Ira, but then again in Voyager to the journey we have Lolita Faccio, who worked on Star Trek for 15, 16 years as a script coordinator. So she knows all of these people. She worked on Voyager for the entire series. So it's always great to have an interviewer who has a connection to the subjects. And Ira had it, Adam Nimoy had it, certainly as Leonard's son, and Bill. Yeah.
And it must be really awesome, by the way, that I think very few people get to have a hero as a kid and then spend actual times as professionals and peers with the idol as an adult.
Oh, no, it's amazing. I think when you first reached out to me, the reason I was too busy to do the podcast is because I'm on the committee. I help run William Shatner's charity horse show every year. So I'm still working with him, which is phenomenal. And he's just the same as the day I met him. He's incredible. His energy level is just unmatched.
And I think one of my favorite docs that you did is, I think for a lot of people, Star Trek, what we left, Deep Space Nine, what we left behind, doc really was tremendous. How you guys did it. For
Well,
those who,
that credit solely on that goes to Ira.
okay,
Certainly, I had the initial idea, but I mean, Ira's the showrunner. Who better? And things like doing the season 8, the writers' room. That was Ira. Ira called me up one day and said, "What would you think if I got the writers together?" I'm like, "Are you kidding?" So and Ira treated our production crew, so myself and the other producers, Joe Kornbrot, Luke Snalem, Kai DeMello Folsom, all of us. It was like a writer's room. So he treated it. We all came in and we had the board with the cards and would move things around, discuss ideas, go to lunch as a group, which Ira always did at when he was here at Paramount. So he really we had the benefit of an incredibly talented showrunner on that.
and I think one thing that's very cool is that, I mean, obviously, you guys didn't know that sometime later, Star Trek Picard season 3 would, have an idea of bringing back the old show, and people would be talking about,
No.
can you make another series with the Deep Space Nine characters and Voyager as well? How does, sometimes I think that doc and that 8th season idea sparks those ideas as well. Could we go and actually do this thing? Is that something you guys thought about when you were actually making it?
Yeah, absolutely. Because I'm friendly with all of these actors and they're all still working. They're all still vital. All of the writers that worked on those series are all still working. I really don't see why you wouldn't do it. And we were kind of hoping that maybe it would spark some thinking, because you see it and why not? And I think what Terry Metalis did with season 3, who he interviewed, by the way, for to the Journey, because he started out on Voyager. I think what he did was brilliant. And now I'm hearing rumblings about a Star Trek Legacy, which I think would be a brilliant idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'm gonna say I'm very excited for that idea, and I think a lot of us who watched What We Left Behind, when we saw the eighth season, thought to themselves, this would have been really, really good.
Yeah. Well, here's what's amazing, though. I always tell people how brilliant all those guys are. That group of writers, that they did that in a day. Yeah. Normally, you're breaking a season. You meet for weeks and and even each episode, but they came up with the entire, at least the story arcs, in one day. So it's pretty amazing.
Now, like you said, when you started the idea for What We Left Behind, you hadn't known that you were going to make this 8th season part of the doc.
We did not know.
Right.
That
right.
Yeah, because again, that process was stopping and starting, but 5 years. And yeah, Ira came up with that.
Once you guys came up with that, Ira came up with that idea, did that affect how you were proceeding with the doc itself? And did you allow you? Oh, go ahead.
Oh no, I'm sorry. Yeah, essentially, it became an interesting challenge. How do we weave this throughout the narrative of the documentary? Because if you've obviously seen the film, we go back and forth from the 8th season. So, we get a feel like, okay, maybe now is the time to cut back, or now is the time to introduce the writers' room and this whole concept. And we would try to, you want what came before we cut back to those sequences, you want it to lead naturally. So it became an interesting editorial challenge, because essentially you have 2 separate films. You've got a traditional interview, and then you've got a creation of an 8th season. So yeah, it was again, that's why having a brilliant writer like Ira direct made it so much easier for us. We couldn't have done it without him.
What surprised you about that documentary, about either what was said by the writers or the actors in their interviews?
Well, certainly I found this over the years, but I think it's the closeness of that cast and the writers and producers. And I do think that's top down from Ira. They're still, it's like no time has passed. And our interviews That's why at some point we probably will release some of the unused material. And the average were 3 4 hour interviews for each person.
Wow.
And we went so deep. We went to the assistant directors. We went to the all of the different crew departments. So I think that's what really, and also how well, again, how close they are as a, because that was 25 years ago.
Mm.
And it's amazing.
And
I don't think you see that all the time on a television series.
one thing they talk about the original Star Trek and stories people have written books about is that the crew was not tight. You know, there was a lot of jealousy, things of that nature. Did any of that follow through on, or was there any ideas of that could exist in any of the other Star Trek, like Deep Space Nine or Star Trek Voyager, when you worked on that?
No. And I think Bill's addressed that before. It was a totally different process for them. I mean, they were 3 seasons. Uh, in those days, it was less of an ensemble. Because remember, all the later Star Treks are true ensembles,
Hmm.
especially Deep Space Nine, which was serialized. And so, people had these season-long story arcs. On the original Star Trek, it was episodic. You had the 3 leads, and the rest of the cast, some of them didn't even have full season contracts. So they never
Hmm.
really had the opportunity, I don't think. And also from talking to them. And then they came back for the movies, but that was 10 years later. And, it's not 7 years
Hmm.
working every single 20-hour days. So, yeah, I think that's a lot of why there's maybe a different relationship between the original crew and the later iterations.
So the new doc that you're making is called To the Journey, looking back at Star Trek Voyager.
Yeah,
I got to see a clip. Thank you so much for it, and it's absolutely awesome looking.
cool.
Is it going to share a similar setup to what we left behind? As far as is there going to be a eighth season discussion or anything that's similar? Throw this be a totally new animal.
No, this is going to be a totally new animal. We've got some surprises, which I can't reveal yet, but I promise you I will to you when I can. But no, it's a little different this time around because if you think about it, the Voyager characters are currently being used in Star Trek.
Yes.
So it's a little difficult. I don't think CBS would like us coming up with our own ideas. Let's put it that way. Because
Hmm.
I mean, Tim Russ has come back, Jerry Ryan, and of course Kate. So Robert Beltran. So yeah, I don't think we'd have that same opportunity this time.
And just like you said, because these characters are have returned in Picard, in Prodigy, were there things that you had to be more aware of that either you couldn't ask, or there's certain roles that they were like, "Don't talk about this. We don't want to hurt what could
I
come
mean, there was
later."
a little bit of that. Like I think we knew about Tim Russ before it was announced, so we couldn't say anything. Um, Things like that. But no, the great thing I think what's also led to my longevity in Star Trek is how really supportive CBS Paramount is
Mm.
of us. They really are kind of hands off, and I think they like the work that we do. They know that it's uplifting for the franchise. It certainly does. It helps. And yeah, we didn't receive any edicts like you can't do this, you can't do that. But again, because all those characters are now viable again, I doubt they'd allow us to do any kind of an eighth season.
Is there any pressure in knowing that this could set the spark or the final spark to make that Voyager Picardish type series?
Only positive. I love it. I mean, Garrett has been incredible to the entire Voyager cast, everybody. So I'd love to see, and I can pretty much speak for them. I think they'd all love to come back
Mm.
and do it again. Uh, but they have been so supportive of us through this whole process. Because again, it wasn't easy during COVID and the various shutdowns and vaccinations, and uh, they really all worked with us. And so I'm proud to say we have the entire cast, with the exception of Jennifer Lean, who
Mm.
has long ago retired from acting, as I understand. But we do certainly pay tribute to her.
So what I found kind of interesting is that when you talked about what we left behind, you said the interviews were 3 to 4 hours long.
Yeah.
Um, it's a similar thing with Voyager. And how much research did it take to prep for these type of interviews?
Well, the research, I mean, I was a Voyager fan from day one. So I have a pretty thorough knowledge of the episodes themselves and getting to know these. Remember, I've interviewed a lot of these people for the captains, for Kate Mulgrew's segment for sure.
Hmm.
And I've been to, some worked at so many Star Trek conventions and Star Trek cruises now. So that element was there, but and I also have the benefit of Joe Kornbrod and Luke Salem, two of our editors, are also worked with me. Joe started in the captains, actually, and Luke started with For the Love of Spock. So my team, and then of course we have Lolita who worked on the show. So we have a team of people that all have different scopes of knowledge on the series. Lolita's is behind the scenes. The rest of us are, more the episodes and the actors.
So when you're approaching these interviews with these actors, like I said, they're very long interview. You said that for hours. How many questions are you preparing? How much is it just in the product of the conversation with the actors that these questions and parts of the show pop up?
With Lolita, because again, she's friendly with them all and knows them. We discuss like areas we want to cover, but it flows. I find these interviews, because I do a lot of them off camera, that it's better being conversational and letting things lead. You have an idea of where you want to go, but none of us sit there with a piece of paper. Shatner was amazing at that. And his process was he'd, do the 2-hour interview, and then he'd throw it to myself, say, David, do you have anything? And was totally open to Kevin Lane, our DP and all, producer and all those. And he would be open to our ideas. And it's the same this time around. We let Lolita do the interview, and then if we have thoughts, we pipe up and throw questions.
When there's that much footage and there's so many, and when you talk about these actors, and if you're like me, once again, as you obviously are, you're a huge fan of these actors, huge fan of these characters. Is it hard to decide what you're going to cut? And because obviously there's a runtime issue, and you're talking for 4 hours, it must be tempting to be like, each actor now has a 4-hour doc themselves.
Oh yeah, I mean, we all fall in love. It's just like even with any kind of film or television, you fall in love with certain sequences or quotes, and then you just have to make the decision. It just doesn't drive the narrative. The fact that I like it is not enough for it to be in there. So yeah, it's difficult, but look at what we did with What We Left Behind. I don't know if you have the Blu-ray, but the special features are longer than the feature. I think there's over like 2 hours of special features. So that's the nice thing about Blu-ray and DVD release. We can save some of those sequences and put them in the special features. And I'm sure we're going to do that here.
Now, one aspect of a documentary that always comes into question is that because they know they're going to be on camera, there's a question of genuineness. Is there ever a question of knowing when the actor is being completely forthright on something or they're holding something back? And if they are holding something back, how much do you want to push them to get that out?
Well, sometimes people will say to us up front, look, I'm not going to talk about this certain issue. Just not going to happen. But I think one of the secrets to our success, my company's success, is that people trust us. They know that if they come to us after and say, gee, I really didn't, would rather not have that in the documentary, we take it out. Because that's not what we're not looking to ambush actors here. This is a celebration of a great series that millions of people love. So the last thing we're going to do is embarrass anyone or go for the salacious quotes. I would have been out of Star Trek by then if that's how I treated people. I mean, I think that's a big part of it is they know when they're coming to one of our films that we are people of our word and they can rely on that.
Now, there was another doc that was on Amazon that was a pretty good doc called The Center Seat. Which did insinuate some issues on the set. Are those things that were going to not be discussed in this other documentary? Are those things that they maybe misunderstood on that show when they discussed it that maybe it's going to be clarified?
We have such a different approach because I haven't seen I've seen some of that, but I did not see the Voyager, and I'm guessing they didn't get the entire cast and crew and every writer like we did.
That'd be correct.
That project was that's a multi-episode television documentary. I mean, we're a theatrical, hopefully feature, like at least get it in theaters like we did the last couple, and the story's being told by the people being interviewed. So we're not, there's no narration in this. So if they're not giving it to us, it's not in the film,
Mm.
if that makes any sense.
Yes.
Because as I think Gates narrated that, and there was pretty
Yes.
heavy in narration. Yeah. So we don't have that luxury. We're getting the quotes from the people themselves.
So when you think about your approach to a documentary like this, is it more a celebration? Is it entertainment? Is it for information? What's the guiding principle?
All the above, for sure. We're aiming for all that. And what makes Voyager so fascinating is the issue, which I guess I was an enlightened guy in '95, but what a major thing it was to have a woman as captain. And B'Elanna Torres in Seven of Nine and Kess, all these strong female characters, which really I guess was not the case so much in '95, and how it's led to this, it's inspired so many women to go into STEM. And so we have that whole issue. I mean, we've talked to astronauts, and especially through the European Space Agency, one of whom captained the International Space Station, and her main inspiration is Janeway.
Oh, that's cool.
So it's pretty cool stuff.
Are there going to be references to Janeway and her prodigy? Because obviously some news Prodigy just came out today, and was some discussion of that show.
Well, I can't see, because we're in editorial now. I mean, we've pretty much wrapped principal photography. As I said, it took a little longer thanks to the shutdowns, but now, because of that, all those interviews have been done. So Prodigy is real, and I don't think Kate had, when we interviewed her in England, believe it or not, we had to go all the way to England she's so busy. But she, at that time, she couldn't really discuss it, Prodigy. So no, it won't really play in this documentary.
I think the cool thing about Voyager, sort of like Deep Space Nine, is that I think those are both shows that are now appreciated more now than they were when they first came out. So at least in my opinion, I mean, especially Voyager, but I think Voyager is becoming increasingly more appreciated over time. So why do you think time has been so friendly to Voyager?
Well, I think a big part of it is the issue I just mentioned, that it treated women as equals, or women in command. So certainly that was ahead of its time. An incredible writing staff, Brandon Braga, Jerry Taylor, Rick Berman, Michael Piller. I mean, I could go on and on about the Brian Fuller. I mean, I don't want to, I know I'm leaving a lot of people out, but incredibly talented writers, most of whom are still working. So again, it was ahead of its time. And I think it did take from DS9 somewhat. I mean, certainly the whole series, if you think about it, is a story arc, because it's all about getting home. And so rather than being the episodic that the original series was, I think it took a little more from Deep Space Nine, in my opinion.
And I mean, obviously, the importance of the strong woman and strong captain is a very important part of what makes Voyager great.
Yeah.
What other elements of the show do you think survived the best through time?
Well, certainly look at the artificial intelligence, the Doctor. I mean, look at what we're dealing with now. Is pretty amazing, I would say. I also think, again, it's a tribute to all of what I find when I watch Voyager. I don't think the effects look dated. I don't think the filmmaking is dated. Certainly the acting is not dated. I think it's still, at least what we've uncovered and speaking to fans at the various conventions, they can be in their early 20s and think it was done yesterday. So I think it's the quality of the overall production and the themes that enable it to keep bringing in new fans. And of course, the ability now to stream it. That was the big thing. The takeaway on Deep Space Nine was the fact that it was not episodic, and you could watch entire seasons in like one sitting, instead of looking around your TV guide. When is it going to air and missing an episode? Now people can sit and binge the entire series, and that's what's happening.
And some of my favorite actors to ever interview, Mr. Tim Russ and Rob Ricardo, for all three from Voyager. They must have been such a pleasure to talk with.
Oh, absolutely. And Tim, I don't think we're quite ready to announce it. I'll tell you what, Jeff, when we get closer, I'll give you another interview.
All right, that'd be
We did
awesome.
something very special with Tim Russ, a couple of things. In other words, what you're going to see, I think for the first time in this film, at least for me, is we did a lot of interesting experiential things with the various actors, which we haven't done before. So it's not just sitting being interviewed. We're actually experiencing things with them. Some pretty cool stuff, I have to say.
Oh, that sounds awesome. You got me really excited now to talk again about it.
Yeah, I'm just thinking. I know if I they'll kill me if I release it all. It's a little soon to release all the specifics.
Are you going to answer the question in the doc why Ensign Kim was always the ensign? Does that question?
Oh yeah, that's covered. And I think we've announced this at a convention, so I think I can discuss this. We actually sent Garrett into zero gravity with the European Space Agency, flew him there, and he actually experienced on their version. NASA has the same thing, supersonic jet or incredibly fast jet, and he experienced zero G. So we actually sent him up with astronauts in training.
Is that the ship that they called the Vomit Comet?
It's the European, the ESA's equivalent, exactly.
That is...
I would call it that, and they'd get upset at me. They said, "No, that's what NASA calls it. We don't call it that."
That is so awesome. My God, it's such a way to envy these actors. They get to do that as well. That's fantastic.
So that's what I'm alluding to, is we really tried to do some interesting, because I've been doing these for such a long time. It's not that we're trying to top ourselves, it's just trying to do something new, different.
And once again, for you personally, like I said, you kind of have become the Star Trek historian. So you have covered so much of Star Trek, you've done it in so much detail. What does it feel like to know that in many ways you are the storyteller of what people are going to remember about the background of Star Trek?
Well, I think maybe one of the greatest satisfactions about all this is it meant so much to me as a fan, and now I can give back, and not just to the fans, but I think, as you've alluded to, we've provided all of these great actors and writers and producers and directors the chance to reflect on their legacies, essentially. So that to me has been incredibly valuable. I mean, moving. I mean, I had a 6-foot poster of Leonard Nimoy on my door when I was 8 years old, and here I am helping his son do the ultimate Leonard Nimoy tribute film. So it doesn't get any better than that.
I mean, so right now, obviously, you've done the Captains, you did Deep Space Nine, you did Voyager. Are we looking at Enterprise coming up in the future? One of these types?
Never say never, right? Isn't that what that's what Sean Connery said when after he did Diamonds Are Forever. So never say never.
And by someone who obviously now has such an interest and insight into the world of Star Trek and the history of Star Trek as you do, where do you see Star Trek now, and where do you see where it's going?
Well, I'll tell you one thing, sitting here at Paramount Studios, I would personally love to see Paramount get the Kelvin universe, the Chris Pine, Zach Quinto. If I tilt my computer, there's Chris Pine.
Very cool.
Yeah. Because actually, when I got these offices when I was working with Bill on the Captains, and Paramount gave us those as a thank you to Shatner for coming back to the lot. So yeah, I'd like to see that restart. But certainly the television I don't think it's going to go away. I think it's incredible. And now that they can explore the Star Trek legacy, selfishly, that's where I want to see it go.
I must admit, I would love to see a Star Trek continuing from Picard, and I think the TV shows, there's so many places for them to go with that. There's the new series like Strange New Worlds, which is and Discovery, but then you can bring back these older shows and bring them back as well. I feel like in many ways we're back into almost a golden age again. It's that we have not seen since the '90s for Star Trek.
But again, as I said, there's no reason why they can't do it. All
Mm.
of these people are still working and vital. Why wouldn't you do it? I mean, I can't reveal the project yet, but I'm working on another Star Trek related documentary, and I just got to interview Patrick Stewart.
Oh.
Incredible. It's like the third time I've interviewed him, actually.
I must admit, as someone who does interviews, you like you hit on all like the bucket list people. Yeah, I am so envious of what you've been able to do. It really is amazing. Not only like I said, as a natural filmmaker, but the interviews you've been able to do.
Thanks to Mr. Shatner. And I'd be remiss. You can see a picture behind me of Burt Reynolds. When you asked me some of my influences, he was another one. Why I got into this business, because I studied acting with him. And he actually got me a role in a film, and he was a total inspiration, Mr. Reynolds. So I have to mention him.
Very cool. Like I said, I'm totally envious of your career. So to the journey, do we have an approximate date of when it's going to be available to be watched?
I mean, we are deep in production, post-production right now. It's going to be obviously sometime next year at this point. We're shooting for the summer. But I cannot give you an exact date. But what I'm so pleased with, and it's just such a joy to see, is how supportive the fans are. They understand we're doing the best we can, but we do not want to rush this. There's no reason to rush this out. We're not going to compromise quality. We're still coming up with new ideas. So yeah, for sure, some next year.
And you said it's going to be a theater release. We're gonna
well, I can't guarantee. We did do a limited theatrical run for the Love of Spock, and we did Fathom. I think we're in 1,300 screens for What We Left Behind, and it did very well. So my hope is that we do the same thing with Voyager. Fathom is incredible, and they were thrilled with how What We Left Behind performed in theaters.
So, I mean, I know it's early because you're still in the middle of doing Voyager, but
Yeah.
do you already kind of have an inkling of what's next for you?
Well, I kind of alluded that there is there's several other projects. Yes. Right now, I've already begun some, pre-production, started doing as we've wrapped principal photography on Voyager. It's enabled me to go out and do some additional interviews while we're editing. So I've got 2 other Star Trek related projects on the horizon.
Are they going to be crowdfunded as this one was, or this is something that's going to be outside?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. Look, crowdfunding is phenomenal, but it's enabled us. I mean, I started with Leonard Nimoy for the Love of Spock was crowdfunded, Kickstarter, because incredibly, we couldn't find a studio that would do a Leonard Nimoy documentary. So I said to his son, let's try Kickstarter, and it worked. And then we topped with Kickstarter with What We Left Behind, and then Voyager. But it's tremendously time consuming because we're also coming up with all this incredible merchandise, and we have to produce it, and we do all the fulfillment and shipment ourselves. We had so much product. I have 2 offices here at Paramount. I had to get a third just to fit all the boxes, and we did all. If I move this camera around, all the postal, everything is still in my office here. So it's a lot of work. It's a lot of work.
Well, Mr. Zappone, I just want to let you know I'm a huge fan of yours, and thank you so much for the interview. It surpassed my expectations. Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.